They called it mercy. But mercy does not make a mother scream. They said she was too poor to be a mother. They took her newborn baby from her arms while she was still bleeding on the hospital bed. They signed papers she did not understand. They smiled at each other over her crying body and called it the right thing to do. They told themselves that a woman with empty pockets had no business raising a child. But what they did not know, what none of them could have imagined on that cold November night in Atlanta, Georgia, was that the tiny baby girl they stole from a poor woman's arms would one day grow up to become the most powerful woman in the entire state. And she would remember everything. Sit back. Turn off your distractions. Because this story is not just about money. It is not just about power. It is about what happens when people mistake poverty for weakness. It is about what happens when the truth, buried for 26 years, finally claws its way back to the surface. And when it does, it destroys everything. But before it destroys them, we have to go back. Back to the woman they underestimated. Back to the girl they thought had nothing. Back to the night it all began. And the secret that started it long before anyone was watching. The woman who lost everything that night had no idea that the people who took from her were far more powerful than she imagined. And that one day, so would she. Before you can understand what they took from her, you have to understand who she was. Her name was Nadia Osei. She was 22 years old, the daughter of Ghanaian immigrants who had crossed the Atlantic with nothing but 2 suitcases and a prayer folded between them. Her father, Emmanuel Osei, had been a schoolteacher back in Kumasi. In Atlanta, he became a night security guard at a shopping mall. Her mother, Abina, who had once sewn wedding gowns for the wives of chiefs, now pressed uniforms at a dry cleaning shop on Peachtree Street. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Vine City. The walls were thin. The heating broke every January. The landlord only fixed things when he felt like it, which was not often. But the apartment was always clean. There were always flowers on the kitchen table, fake ones from the dollar store, but arranged with care. And there was always food, not much, but enough, served on a plastic tablecloth that Abina washed and ironed every Sunday. Nadia grew up understanding one thing very clearly. They did not have money, but they had dignity. And dignity, her mother always said, was something no one could take from you. Nadia, her mother would tell her, pressing her small hands between her warm palms, in this country, people will look at your skin and make a decision. They will look at your address and make a decision. They will look at what is in your pocket and make a decision. But none of those decisions belong to you. You belong only to God and to yourself. Nadia carried those words like armor. She was bright, exceptionally bright. She won a partial scholarship to Georgia State University and studied nursing. She worked weekends at a diner near campus, carrying plates of food with both hands to save time, smiling at customers who sometimes did not smile back. She sent money home every month, even when it was only $40. She never complained. In her second year of university, she fell in love. His name was Marcus Webb. He was tall, with a warm laugh that filled any room he walked into. He played basketball badly, told jokes that were only funny because he laughed so hard at them himself, and he looked at Nadia like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. He was studying business. His family was not rich, but they were comfortable, a different kind of comfortable from Nadia's family. His mother wore jewelry that was real. His father drove a car that was less than 5 years old. They lived in Decatur in a house with a proper yard. Nadia and Marcus dated for a year. Then she got pregnant. And that is when she discovered that Marcus Webb, the man who looked at her like she was everything, had a mother who saw her as absolutely nothing. What that woman said to Nadia across a polished dining table would set everything in motion. And it would cost everyone involved far more than they ever expected. She walked into that house, hoping for kindness. She walked out carrying the weight of a plan already set against her. She told Marcus on a Thursday evening, sitting in his car outside her dormitory. She watched his face carefully, the way she always watched people's faces when something important was about to happen. His smile disappeared, not slowly, all at once. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I took 3 tests." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, students walked past laughing. The world continued without caring. "I can't do this right now," Marcus finally said. "I have 2 more years of school. I don't have any money. My parents," he stopped. "Your parents what?" Nadia asked quietly. He didn't answer. She got out of the car. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold November air and watched him drive away. She stood there for a long time, even after his taillights disappeared. Then she walked back to her dormitory room, sat on her bed, placed her hand on her flat stomach, and whispered, "Don't worry. I have you." She called her parents that same night. Her father was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Come home, Nadia. We will figure this out together." Her mother cried on the phone, but not from shame. From love. "My baby," she said over and over. "My baby." Nadia moved back to Vine City. She deferred her studies for a semester. She started working more hours at the diner. She was 5 months pregnant when the diner closed down and she lost her job. She was 6 months pregnant when her father had a minor stroke that kept him home from work for 3 weeks. She was 7 months pregnant when the landlord raised the rent by $200. The pressure was enormous, but they did not break. She was 8 months pregnant when Marcus's mother called her. Her name was Patricia Webb. Her voice on the phone was smooth and measured, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed what she was going to say. "Nadia, I think we should meet," Patricia said. "Just as women. There are some things we need to discuss before this baby comes." Nadia agreed. She was still young enough, still hopeful enough to think that Patricia Webb was calling because she wanted to be part of her grandchild's life. She took 2 buses to Decatur. Patricia opened the door in a cream blouse and gold earrings. She offered Nadia tea. She sat across from her at a polished dining table and smiled with a warmth that did not reach her eyes. "You seem like a good girl," Patricia said. "Hardworking. Your parents raised you well." She paused. "But you have to understand something, Nadia. Marcus has a future. A real future. He can't be held back by complications." Nadia set down her tea. "Complications," she repeated. "You are not in a stable position," Patricia continued. "No income, no stable home. Your father is ill. Is it really fair to bring a child into that?" Nadia looked at her. "What are you asking me to do?" Patricia placed a manila envelope on the table and slid it across the polished surface. "Inside this envelope is a contact at Caring Hearts Adoption Agency here in Atlanta. They work with excellent families. Wealthy families. Families who can give your child every opportunity." The room went very quiet. "And Marcus?" Nadia asked. "Marcus will not be involved," Patricia said. "He has agreed that this is for the best." Nadia did not open the envelope. She stood up slowly, with the careful, deliberate movement of a woman who is 8 months pregnant and running out of energy for things that deserved more rage than she currently had. "Thank you for the tea," she said. She walked to the door, took the 2 buses back to Vine City, and told her mother what had happened. Abina Osei listened without interrupting. When Nadia finished, her mother stood up, went to the kitchen, came back with a glass of water, handed it to her daughter, sat back down, and said, "We will raise this child. All of us. Together. Anyone who tries to take her from you will have to go through God first." Nadia believed her. She should have known that the people who wanted to take her daughter were not afraid of God. They were afraid of nothing, because they had already planned everything, down to the last detail, down to the exact night Nadia would walk into that hospital. What happened in that delivery room 1 month later was not an accident. It was not spontaneous. It had been arranged, and it was about to begin. She held her daughter for 1 hour. 1 hour was all they allowed her. And then they came. Nadia's daughter was born on a cold February morning at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. The labor was long and hard. Nadia gripped her mother's hand for 11 hours. Her father sat in the waiting room reading his Bible, his lips moving in silent prayer. When it was over, when the cry finally split the air, Nadia lifted her head with every last thing she had and said, "Let me see her. Let me see my baby." The nurse placed the baby in her arms. She was perfect. She had a full head of dark hair and Nadia's mother's wide forehead and the tiniest fingernails Nadia had ever seen. She looked up at Nadia with new, unfocused eyes, and the world reorganized itself around that moment. "Her name is Amara," Nadia whispered. "It means grace." She had 1 hour with her daughter. 1 hour of holding her, studying her, memorizing her, the smell of her, the weight of her, the impossible softness of her cheek. Then 2 people entered the room, a woman in a gray blazer and a man in a dark suit. The woman introduced herself as an attorney. The man said nothing. He stood near the door like a wall. "Ms. Osei," the attorney said, opening a folder. "We are here from Caring Hearts Adoption Agency. As previously discussed with the father's family, There are some matters that need to be addressed. I never discussed anything, Nadia said. Her voice was steady. Her arms tightened around Amara. Given your current financial circumstances, the attorney continued smoothly, as if Nadia had not spoken. A determination has been made that voluntary placement into a pre-approved family structure would be in the child's best interest. Nadia looked at her. I'm not giving you my baby. Ms. Osei, you are currently unemployed. Your father is recovering from a medical episode. Your family residence does not meet the minimum square footage requirements for a newborn. How do you know about my father? How do you know about my apartment? Nadia's voice rose. Her mother stood up from the corner chair. Who sent you here? Who sent you? The attorney placed a document on the bedside table. This is a voluntary relinquishment form. If you sign it, your daughter will be placed with an exceptional family. She has me, Nadia said. Get out of my room. What happened next? Nadia spent years trying to fully understand. How it moved so fast. How a conversation became a procedure. A hospital supervisor arrived. Then a woman who said she was from the Department of Family Services. There were forms, documents, assessments, reports, generated at a speed that seemed impossible unless they had been prepared long before Nadia walked into that hospital room. There was a word used more than once. Neglect. Not actual neglect. Amara had been born healthy, held and fed, and loved in her first hour of life. But potential neglect. The risk of neglect. Words assembled into a case against a woman who had done nothing wrong except be poor at the wrong moment in the wrong city. Abina stood in the corridor screaming. Emmanuel stood with his hand pressed flat against the wall, his face ashen. A security guard blocked the doorway, and Nadia held her daughter with everything she had, her arms shaking, her voice raw from saying no, 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 until the word lost its meaning and became just breath, just the last thing she had left. I will find you, she whispered into Amara's hair. Do you hear me? I will find you. I promise. Then her daughter was gone. But here's what the people who took Amara did not know. They did not know that a hospital nurse, moved by what she witnessed, had quietly taken out her phone and captured one single photograph, a woman holding her baby. They did not know that photograph would be carried in the inside pocket of a coat for 26 years. And they did not know that the baby they were placing into comfort and safety and wealth was going to grow up and start asking questions. The silence that followed Amara's removal would last for 26 years. But silences like this one do not end quietly. They explode. She did not collapse. She did not give up. She did something far more dangerous. She quietly became someone they should have been afraid of. What grief does to a person is different every time. Some people explode. Some people go numb. Some people simply continue, walking through the world like an outline of themselves. Their inside hollowed out. Their outside still holding its shape, just enough to fool everyone. Nadia did all three. She spent the first 3 months trying to fight. She contacted legal aid organizations. She wrote letters. She made phone calls that went unreturned. She showed up at the Department of Family Services office on Pryor Street and was told to wait, and then was told to come back, and then was handed forms that led to more forms that led to nowhere. She found an attorney who took her case pro bono, a young woman named Danielle Reeves who wore the same blazer every time they met and had fire at her eyes but very limited power. They moved the placement fast, Danielle told her. Faster than they should have. The paperwork has irregularities, but the system is not designed to make reversals easy. She paused. Nadia, I want to be honest with you. If the adoptive family has resources, significant resources, this becomes much harder. How much harder? Nadia asked. Danielle looked at her carefully. Much harder. Nadia returned home that evening and sat in the kitchen. The fake flowers were on the table. Her mother was cooking. The smell of palm soup filled the small apartment. The smell of every hard day she had ever come home to. The smell of being loved without being saved. She put her face in her hands and cried. Not beautifully, not quietly, with her whole body, with sounds that frightened her parents and brought them both to kneel beside her chair, her mother pressing her face against Nadia's cheek, her father placing his big, worn hand on the back of her neck. God sees, her father said. He sees everything that was done tonight, and nothing hidden from God stays hidden. Nadia wiped her face. She breathed in. She breathed out. Then she went back to work. She returned to Georgia State. She finished her nursing degree. She worked nights at a hospital, days at a community clinic, weekends whenever she could get them. She sent money to her parents every month and eventually helped them move into a slightly bigger apartment. She never dated. She did not have the space for it inside herself. That space was taken, occupied by a face she had known for only 1 hour and spent every year since trying not to forget. She kept a photograph, the only one she had, taken by a hospital nurse on Nadia's phone before anyone realized what was happening. It showed Amara asleep in her arms, so small she barely seemed real. Nadia kept it in the inside pocket of every jacket she owned. Years passed. The anger did not leave. It transformed, the way fire transforms wood. Not disappearing but becoming something else. Something harder. Something that generated heat without needing to consume anything new. Nadia became a woman who worked with a terrifying precision. Every certificate she earned, every promotion she received, every skill she built, all of it was construction. All of it was preparation. For what? She could not have said in those early years. But somewhere deep in the place where mothers keep things that cannot be spoken, she knew. Meanwhile, across the city, in a house that cost more than Nadia would earn in a decade, a little girl with dark hair and a wide forehead was growing up. And she was also beginning to ask questions that no one in that house was prepared to answer. What that little girl would discover about herself, and about the family that raised her, would change every single life connected to this story. But first, you need to meet her. She had everything, except the truth. And the truth, it turns out, was the only thing that mattered. Across the city of Atlanta, in a house in Buckhead that had 6 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and a swimming pool that was cleaned twice a week, a little girl named Charlotte Webb grew up believing she was the luckiest child alive. Her adoptive parents were Richard and Diane Hargrove. Richard Hargrove was a commercial real estate developer, one of the biggest in the Southeast. He had built hotels and office towers and luxury residential complexes from Atlanta to Charlotte to Nashville. His name was on buildings. His face appeared in business magazines. He sat on charity boards and donated to political campaigns and played golf with people whose names you would recognize. Diane Hargrove organized fundraisers for children's hospitals. She dressed Charlotte in clothes that cost more than Nadia's monthly salary. She enrolled her in piano lessons, French lessons, equestrian lessons. She photographed every milestone with captions about gratitude and blessings. They had tried for years to have a biological child and could not. When Caring Hearts Adoption Agency brought them Charlotte, they held her like a miracle. And in their way, they truly loved her. That is the complicated truth of this story. The Hargroves were not monsters. They were simply people who had wanted something badly enough to allow others to obtain it without asking too many questions about the method. Charlotte grew up happy. She was curious and funny and disturbingly smart. She read everything. She argued with her teachers when they were wrong and admitted it when she was wrong, which was not often. She had a stubbornness that baffled her adoptive parents, and a directness that made adults slightly uncomfortable, the way very honest children always do. By the time she was 10, she was asking questions. "Why don't I look like you?" she asked Diane one evening, standing in the bathroom doorway. "Because you're adopted, sweetheart. We've talked about this." "I know, but where did I come from? Who is my real mother?" Diane's hand paused for just a moment. Then she continued, smooth and practiced. "We don't know much about her, baby. What we know is that she loved you very much and wanted a better life for you." Charlotte looked at her own face in the mirror. Dark skin, wide forehead, eyes that held things longer than most children's eyes did. "Did she look like me?" Charlotte asked. "I imagine so," Diane said. Charlotte said nothing more, but she filed the question away in the part of herself that never forgot anything. She filed it there and let it sit for 16 more years, quietly growing roots, quietly becoming something that could not be ignored. By the time she was 26, it had become something she could no longer ignore. And the day she decided to stop ignoring, it was the day the most powerful family in Atlanta began to fall. She started with a simple DNA test, a swab of the inside of her cheek on a Tuesday afternoon. She did not tell her parents. She did not tell anyone. She just mailed it in and waited. She had no idea what she was about to uncover. Nobody did. One DNA test, one name, and a 26-year-old truth that refused to stay buried any longer. Charlotte Hargrove graduated from Emory University at 21, with a degree in finance and a minor in business law. She was sharp, focused, and by her junior year was already being recruited by 3 different investment firms. Richard Hargrove was proud in a way that was almost painful to watch. She believed in herself, but she also, quietly, believed something else. Something she had never said out loud. She had always known she was adopted. She had always been told it was a gift. But Charlotte had studied finance. She knew how to look at a story and ask, who benefits? She knew how to examine a transaction and ask, what was the real price? And the older she got, the more the official version of her origin felt like a press release. Smooth, clean, strategically incomplete. The summer after graduation, she started looking. She began with a DNA ancestry service. She swabbed the inside of her cheek on a Tuesday afternoon and mailed it in without telling her parents. When the results came back 6 weeks later, she sat alone in her apartment and read them 3 times. Her biological ethnicity, primarily West African, with strong markers consistent with Ghana. She created a profile on the service's family matching feature. Within 48 hours, she had a match. A second cousin, someone she had never heard of, with the last name Osei. Osei. She said the name out loud in her empty apartment. It felt like something clicking into place. She found Nadia Osei through the cousin's profile. It took her 40 minutes of careful searching. By the end of those 40 minutes, she was sitting very still, looking at the LinkedIn profile of a woman named Nadia Osei, 48 years old, originally from Vine City, Atlanta, currently the director of nursing at Piedmont Atlanta Hospital, and something in Charlotte's chest cracked open like a fault line. The face on the screen was her face. Older, lived in, marked by years of work and something harder to name, but unmistakably, undeniably, irreversibly, her face. Charlotte sat without moving for a very long time. She was about to pick up the phone and call, when another thought stopped her cold. She had been researching carefully enough to notice something. Something that sat at the edge of her awareness like smoke from a fire she could not yet see. She typed 2 more things into her search. Then she sat back. Her hands went still, because the name Caring Hearts Adoption Agency appeared twice in her search results. Once as the agency that had placed her, and once, listed clearly in a board member directory from the year 2000, beside the name of her adoptive father. Richard Hargrove had been on the board of Caring Hearts Adoption Agency the year before she was born. The room felt very cold suddenly. She picked up the phone. Her hands were shaking, but she dialed the number anyway. Because some truths, once you see them, cannot be unseen. And some calls, once made, cannot be taken back. 2 women, 1 phone call, and 26 years of silence about to break all at once. The phone rang 3 times. A receptionist answered. Charlotte asked for the director of nursing. She was told the director was in a meeting. She left her name and number and was told someone would call her back. She sat by her phone for 2 hours. When it rang, she answered before the second ring had finished. This is Nadia Osei, the voice said. Professional. Controlled. Charlotte opened her mouth and nothing came out. For the first time in her adult life, Charlotte Hargrove, who had given presentations to rooms full of executives, who had debated professors twice her age and one, who had a reputation for never being rattled, had nothing to say. Hello. Nadia said. I'm sorry, Charlotte managed. My name is Charlotte Hargrove. I think I might be, she stopped. Started again. I took a DNA test. And the results. The silence on the other end of the phone was the kind that contains an entire life. What is your date of birth? Nadia asked. Her voice had changed. Something underneath the professional surface had shifted, like ground responding to distant pressure. Charlotte told her. Another silence. Where were you born? Nadia asked. Grady Memorial Hospital, Charlotte said. Atlanta. The sound Nadia made was not a word. It was not crying and not laughter, and not any sound Charlotte had heard before. It was the sound of something that had been held closed for 26 years, suddenly and catastrophically opening. I have a photograph, Nadia said, when she could speak again. I've had it for 26 years. I've carried it every single day. Charlotte pressed her hand flat against her chest. Tell me what she looks like, she whispered. In the photograph. Tell me. She's sleeping, Nadia said. She's so small you almost can't believe she's real. She has a full head of dark hair. And she's in the arms of a woman who is never going to let her go. A pause. But they took her anyway. Charlotte felt something happen in her face. Not just tears, something more structural. Like a wall coming down that she had not known was there. "I want to meet you," she said. "Yes," Nadia said immediately. "Tell me when and where." They agreed on a time and place. Charlotte put the phone down and looked across her apartment. The same apartment she had lived in for 2 years. The same walls. The same windows. The same city outside. Everything looked different now. But Charlotte had not yet told Nadia what she had found about Richard Hargrove and the adoption agency board. She needed to be sure first. She needed to look her mother in the eyes first. Because what she was beginning to understand, if it was true, was not just a family story. It was a crime. And it was going to take everything she had to prove it. She had prepared herself for this moment for weeks. She was not prepared. They met at a coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta on a Saturday morning. Charlotte arrived 10 minutes early and sat with her back to the wall where she could see the door. She had told no one. Not her adoptive parents. Not her friends. No one. This was hers. This was the most important morning of her life, and she was not willing to share it yet. Nadia walked in at exactly the agreed time. Charlotte had studied the LinkedIn photo for days, had prepared herself, had told herself she was ready. She was not ready. Nadia Osei was a small woman with a precise way of moving, as if every step was decided in advance. She wore a dark blue coat and carried her bag on her right shoulder. Her hair was natural, pulled back. Her face was the face Charlotte had been looking at in the mirror her whole life. Older and deeper and worn through with a kind of suffering that Charlotte was only beginning to understand. Nadia saw her from across the room and stopped walking. They looked at each other from 10 feet away. Neither moved for a long moment. Then Nadia came forward and Charlotte stood, and they stood facing each other, and neither of them knew what to do with their hands until Nadia reached out and touched Charlotte's face. Both hands, cupping her cheeks the way you hold something you were afraid you would never see again. "Amara," Nadia whispered. Charlotte had been called Charlotte her entire life. The name Amara had never been said to her, not once. But it entered her like a key entering a lock. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'm here." They sat in that coffee shop for 4 hours. Nadia talked. Charlotte listened. Then Charlotte talked, and Nadia listened. By the end, the coffee had gone cold, and neither of them had noticed. Nadia told her everything. The pregnancy, Marcus Webb, the visit from Patricia Webb, the hospital, the attorney in the gray blazer, the form she did not sign, but that appeared signed anyway, the legal fight that went nowhere, the years of carrying a photograph. Charlotte listened with the stillness of a person who is building something very precise in their mind, something that requires complete and accurate information. When Nadia finished, Charlotte asked, "Were the adoption papers ever shown to you? Did you sign anything voluntarily?" "I signed nothing," Nadia said. "I refused to sign. I kept refusing." Then Nadia reached in her bag and removed a manila folder. She placed it on the table. "I have kept every document," Nadia said. "Every letter. Every form they gave me. Every name. For 26 years. I have kept everything." Charlotte opened the folder. She read in silence for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were different. Not sad. Not angry. Something beyond both those things. The look of a person who has just received confirmation of something they already knew in their blood. "I need to tell you something," Charlotte said carefully. "My adoptive father is Richard Hargrove." She paused to let the name land. "He has been on the board of Caring Hearts Adoption Agency since the year before I was born." The table between them was very quiet. Nadia stared at her. "He has 16 buildings in Atlanta," Charlotte continued. "He has relationships with judges, city officials, hospital administrators." She leaned forward slightly. "And I believe he did not just benefit for what happened to you. I believe he arranged it." The silence that followed was the heaviest silence in that coffee shop's entire history. Neither woman spoke for a full minute. Because what Charlotte had just said, if it could be proven, was not just the story of one stolen child. It was something much, much larger. And Charlotte had already decided exactly what she was going to do about it. She did not confront them right away. She was smarter than that. She spent 4 months building something no amount of money could tear down: the truth. Charlotte Hargrove had grown up watching her adoptive father work. She had sat in his office as a child, coloring at the small desk he kept for her in the corner, listening to him on the phone, watching him read documents and sign papers, and move money from one place to another with the calm authority of a man who had never in his adult life been told no. She understood now. with a clarity that made her stomach cold, that Richard Hargrove had decided he wanted a child the same way he decided he wanted a piece of land. He had identified it, assessed its availability, applied resources, and acquired it. The fact that the piece of land in question was a human being with a mother who was fighting for her, had not changed his approach. She did not go home immediately after meeting Nadia. She drove to a park and sat in her car for an hour. Then she called a law firm, not the one her father used, not any firm in his network. She called a firm in Washington, D.C. that specialized in wrongful adoption cases and civil rights violations. She got an attorney named James Kofi on the phone. He listened without interrupting for 12 minutes. "Is this about finding justice for your birth mother? Or is this about something else?" he asked. "Both," Charlotte said. What was done to that woman was illegal. What was allowed to happen to her, facilitated deliberately by people in positions of power, was a crime. And I want to treat it as one. Do you understand what this could mean for your adoptive family? Yes, Charlotte said. I understand completely. Over the next 4 months, Charlotte worked with a precision and focus that frightened even her. She met with Nadia twice a week. She hired a private investigator to trace the chain of events from the night of Amara's birth. The hospital administrator who made the call to the agency, the DFS worker who appeared without a standard case file, the adoption paperwork that showed signatures from a mother who had repeatedly refused to sign. She found something the investigators described as a pattern. It was not just Amara, not just Charlotte. There were 3 other cases in a 5-year window where Caring Hearts Adoption Agency had facilitated placements under similarly irregular circumstances. All 3 birth mothers were young, black, and poor. All 3 of the adoptive families were white, wealthy, and connected. One of those families was the Hargroves. She gave everything to James Kofi. She gave it to a journalist at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution she had been quietly briefing for 2 months. She gave it to the Georgia Attorney General's office through a separate channel. And then, when everything was in place and the clock could not be stopped, she went home to Buckhead. She sat down at the dining table with the 2 people who had raised her. She ate dinner with them like any other Tuesday night. She asked about Richard's projects. She asked about Diane's fundraiser. She smiled at the right moments. And then she set the table on fire. What she said to her adoptive parents that night at dinner, with the good china and the candles burning, was something neither of them ever fully recovered from. She had waited 4 months for this moment. She had planned every word, and she delivered every single one without raising her voice once. It was a Tuesday in October. Diane had made Richard's favorite, braised short ribs with roasted vegetables. The dining room was candlelit. The table was set with the good china. Charlotte sat across from the 2 people who had raised her, who had paid for her education, who had attended every recital and every graduation, and who had, she knew, in their way, genuinely loved her. She ate quietly. She asked Richard about a development project in Charlotte, North Carolina. She asked Diane about the hospital fundraiser. She listened to both of them with full attention. After dessert, when Diane stood to clear the plates, Charlotte said, "I need to tell you both something." She said it the way she said everything important, calmly, precisely, without preamble. "I found my birth mother." Diane set down the plate she was holding. Richard looked up from his wine glass. "Her name is Nadia Osei. She has lived in Atlanta her entire life. She is currently the director of nursing at Piedmont Atlanta Hospital." Charlotte paused. She did not give me up willingly. She refused to sign the relinquishment papers. The documents that facilitated my adoption contain fraudulent signatures and procedural violations that I have documented with the help of a federal attorney. The room was very quiet. "Charlotte," Richard began. "I am not finished," she said. She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. "I want you to understand that I know what happened. I know that you sit on the board of Caring Hearts. I know that the hospital administrator who initiated the DFS contact that night was a man named Gerald Park, who has subsequently received development contracts from Hargrove Development Group totaling over $4 million. I know the name of the DFS worker who appeared that night without a standard case file. Her name was Susan Mirren. She retired from state service 2 years later with a pension supplement funded through a private trust. I know all of it." Diane sat back down. Her face had gone the color of paper. Richard said nothing. He looked at Charlotte with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not denial, something more complex, something that looked distantly like grief. I want you to know, Charlotte continued, that I am not doing this because I hate you. I don't hate you. You raised me. But you took me from a woman who never stopped looking for me. You used your money and your connections and your power to steal a baby from a 22-year-old who had done nothing wrong except not have enough money. And then you build a life around that. And I'm going to tell the truth about it. She stood up. I will be making a statement to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on Thursday. The Attorney General's office is already in possession of the documentation. My attorney will be in contact with yours. She picked up her coat. I'm moving out this weekend. I have already arranged an apartment. Charlotte, Diane said. Her voice was thin. Please, can we talk about this? We are talking about it, Charlotte said. This is the conversation. She buttoned her coat. I'm going to ask you both to do one thing. When the time comes, and it will come, I want you to tell the truth. Not for me. Not for yourselves. For every other woman this happened to. She walked to the front door. She stopped with her hand on the doorknob and said, without turning around, I know you loved me. I know it was real. But love does not make what happened right. It never did. Then she opened the door and walked out into the cool October night. Behind her, the candles on the dining table continued to burn. Richard Hargrove sat at the head of his table in the house he had built with power and money and connections. And for the first time in his life, all three of those things were completely useless to him. Thursday was 2 days away, and Thursday was going to change everything. His story broke on a Thursday morning. By noon, the most powerful man in Atlanta could not answer his phone fast enough. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution story ran on a Thursday morning. The headline read, Adopted daughter of prominent Atlanta developer alleges birth mother was defrauded. Documents point to systemic pattern. By 10 o'clock that morning, it had been shared 40,000 times. By noon, it was on 3 national news networks. By 3 in the afternoon, the Georgia Attorney General's office had confirmed it was opening a formal investigation into Caring Hearts Adoption Agency, the circumstances of at least 4 specific adoption cases, and the conduct of several named officials and private citizens. Charlotte gave a press statement on the steps of the law firm. She wore a dark suit and spoke without notes. Nadia stood beside her. Neither of them cried. They were both past crying about this. They stood straight, and they spoke clearly, and they looked directly into the cameras. My name is Charlotte Hargrove, Charlotte said. I was born Amara Osei. My mother is Nadia Osei, and she never gave me up. She was 22 years old, unemployed, and the daughter of immigrants who worked night shifts and dry cleaning counters. She was not deemed good enough to be my mother. She was not powerful enough to fight what was done to her. So they took me. She paused. I am here today because I am powerful enough. And I will use every resource I have to make sure that what was done to her, what was done to all of them, is seen clearly, recorded accurately, and answered for fully. Behind her, Nadia pressed her lips together and breathed. My name is Nadia Osei, Nadia said when it was her turn. Her voice was steady. 26 years of steadiness had built up to this moment. I worked 3 jobs. I went back to school. I became the director of a nursing department. I did everything I was supposed to do. I did everything they said was required to be a good mother. She paused. I just did it after they took my daughter instead of before. Because they never gave me the chance to do it before. The reporters were very quiet. The reporters were very quiet. I want every young woman watching this, every poor woman, every woman who has been told that her circumstances make her less of a mother, to hear me say this clearly. Your poverty is not a character flaw. Your struggle is not evidence of unworthiness. And no one has the right to decide that your child is better off without you simply because someone else has more money. The cameras were still rolling. The microphones were still open. The world was watching. And in a house in Buckhead, Richard Hargrove's phone was ringing with calls from board members and attorneys and investors. Every one of them asking the same question. Is it true? What happened to Richard Hargrove, to Caring Hearts, to Patricia Webb, to Marcus, to every single person connected to that night in Grady Memorial Hospital? What happened to all of them when the truth was finally set free was something nobody in their circle of wealth and power had ever experienced before, because they had never before faced someone who had everything they had and was willing to use all of it against them. They had spent 26 years protected by money and silence. It took Charlotte Hargrove 4 months to dismantle both. What followed happened over months, but it felt like it happened all at once. Richard Hargrove's attorney issued a statement calling the allegations deeply troubling and categorically denied. It lasted approximately 48 hours before a second document surfaced. An internal email from 2001, 3 months before Charlotte's birth, in which Richard Hargrove asked the director of Caring Hearts for an update on suitable infant placements and mentioned a substantial donation contingent on a successful match. The director's reply referenced a situation developing at Grady Memorial and noted that it was being handled discreetly. Hargrove Development Group's stock price dropped 20% in 4 days. 3 of Richard's board members resigned. 2 major commercial tenants announced they were not renewing their leases. The golf club where Richard played every Saturday quietly disinvited him from the member guest tournament. Gerald Park, the hospital administrator who had initiated the DFS contact the night Amara was born, was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. He resigned 11 days later and checked himself into a private facility. Susan Mirren, the retired DFS worker, was located by investigators living in Savannah. She retained an attorney and was cooperating with the investigation. Patricia Webb, Marcus's mother, the woman who had placed the envelope on the polished dining table 26 years ago, claimed she had simply provided Nadia with information and had not been involved in any coordinated effort. But investigators were examining her financial records. A payment from a shell company connected to one of Richard Hargrove's subsidiaries, dated 3 weeks before Charlotte's birth, had been found in her account. The amount was $45,000. Marcus Webb declined to comment publicly. He did, according to James Kofi's office, make a private call to Charlotte. She did not take it. Diane Hargrove gave a statement that was different from her husband's. It was short and it was honest. I did not know the full circumstances of how my daughter came to us, she said. I have asked myself every day since Thursday whether I should have known, whether I should have asked more questions. I don't have a good answer for that. I'm sorry. It was not enough. But it was something. Richard Hargrove was indicted on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and violation of civil rights statutes. The documents were real. The emails were real. The money trail was real. And the woman who had assembled all of it was not going away. The empire Richard Hargrove had spent 30 years building was cracking from the inside. And every crack led back to the same place. One cold February night at Grady Memorial Hospital, when a poor woman held her daughter for 1 hour and said, "I will find you." She had found her. And now, in the quiet that followed the storm, the 2 women who had been kept apart by wealth and power and fraud had something they had never had before: time. Time to sit together. Time to know each other. And one more truth to uncover between them. After 26 years of carrying everything alone, she finally had someone to set it down with. On a Saturday morning in November, 3 weeks after the story broke, Charlotte drove to Vine City. The neighborhood had changed in the decades since Nadia grew up there. Some streets had improved. Some had not. The apartment building where Nadia's parents had lived was still standing, slightly shabbier now, its face marked by years. Nadia was standing outside when Charlotte pulled up. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one through the car window before Charlotte had fully stopped. They walked to a small park nearby. It was cold. They sat on a bench and drank their coffee and watched a group of children playing on the far side of the park. "How are you?" Charlotte asked. "Exhausted," Nadia said, "and more alive than I have felt in 20 years. Charlotte nodded. She understood that. "I need to tell you something," Nadia said after a moment. "I have spent 26 years feeling guilty. Not for what happened. I never blamed myself for what they did. But for not being able to stop it. For not being powerful enough. For being poor at the wrong time." She paused. "I have carried that guilt like a second job." Charlotte was quiet, listening. "I want you to know that when I look at what you have done." Nadia stopped. She pressed her lips together. She breathed. "I am not proud of you the way a mother is proud of a child for getting good grades. I am proud of you the way someone is proud of something that took longer and cost more and mattered more than anything else." She turned to look at Charlotte directly. "You did not have to do this. You could have found me, gotten your answers, and gone back to your life. You chose not to." "I had good reasons," Charlotte said. "Tell me." Charlotte thought about it. "You said something on the phone. That first call. You said you had been carrying a photograph for 26 years. Every day." She paused. "I thought about what that meant. What kind of person carries a picture of something they lost for 26 years? What kind of love does that?" She looked at the children playing across the park. I thought, that is the woman who should have raised me. And the people who took me from her have lived 26 comfortable years while she carried that weight. That's not a balance. I don't accept that balance. Nadia looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached in her coat pocket and took out a photograph. It was small and worn at the edges, the image slightly faded from 2.5 decades of careful handling. A young woman in a hospital bed, a baby in her arms, impossibly small, a full head of dark hair. She held it out to Charlotte. Charlotte took it. She looked at it for a long time. She looked at the young woman who was her mother, terrified and exhausted and holding on with everything she had. She looked at the tiny baby who was herself, still safe in the only arms that had ever been truly hers. She held it carefully, the way you hold something that is both very old and very new. Thank you, she said. I always said I was going to give it to you, Nadia said quietly. When I found you, I always said it belonged to you. Neither of them said anything more for a long time. They just sat on that park bench in Vine City and drank their cold coffee and watched the children play. 2 women, 1 photograph, 26 years returned. But the story was not over yet, because Charlotte Hargrove was not finished. She had one more thing to build, and when she built it, the world was going to pay attention. She took her mother's name, put on a building, and showed the world exactly what poverty had never been able to stop. 6 months after the story broke, Charlotte Hargrove resigned from the investment firm that had recruited her out of Emory and founded her own firm. She named it Osei Capital. The name was deliberate. The name was everything. Osei Capital focused on financial services in underserved communities, investment products designed for people who had been excluded from wealth building for generations, financial literacy programming, small business lending in neighborhoods like Vine City where capital had been systematically withheld. It was not a charity. It was built to be a serious, profitable business, because Charlotte had watched her adoptive father long enough to know that charity changes nothing. Only power changes things. And in the language of power, money speaks the loudest. Within 2 years, Osei Capital had raised $40 million. Within 3 years, it was managing twice that. Charlotte was on the cover of Forbes at 28 under the headline, The Correction. She did not build it alone. She had good people around her. And she had Nadia, who became not just her mother, but something else. An advisor, a conscience, a presence. Nadia became the firm's director of community impact. She was very good at it. Emmanuel and Abina Osei, now in their 70s, moved into a house in Sandy Springs that their granddaughter helped them buy. It had a garden. It had good heating. It had more rooms than they needed, and they filled the extra ones with grandchildren and the children of friends and neighbors, because that is what Ghanaian grandparents do with extra rooms. Emmanuel Osei sat in his garden on a spring afternoon and said to his wife, I told Nadia, God sees. He sees everything. He pressed his palm flat against his chest. I knew. I always knew. Abina Osei said nothing. She handed him a cup of tea and watched the garden. And across the city, in a building with the name Osei on the front of it, a woman who had been born Amara, taken and renamed and given back to herself, sat at a desk and looked out over Atlanta and thought about what her grandmother had said when she was small. You belong only to God and to yourself. She had always belonged to herself. They had simply tried to borrow her without permission. She was back now, and she was staying. Every person who played a role in that night at Grady Memorial Hospital eventually faced exactly what they had earned. Not more, not less. Exactly what they had earned. Richard Hargrove's case took 3 years to reach trial. In the end, he pleaded no contest to 2 federal charges and received a sentence of 18 months in a minimum security facility and a fine of $6 million. His attorneys had worked very hard for that outcome. The truth is that men with $6 million to pay in fines rarely face the full weight of what they have done. But the record existed. The documentation was public. The truth was on paper, signed and sealed and attached to his name permanently. The buildings still stood, but his name on them meant something different now. Caring Hearts Adoption Agency was shut down by the Georgia Attorney General's office. 2 of its former directors faced criminal charges. The 4 identified irregular cases, including Charlotte's, were formally reviewed. In 2 of those cases, birth mothers were still alive and were contacted. What followed from those contacts was private, but it happened. Patricia Webb pled guilty to fraud and received 2 years of probation and community service. Marcus Webb was not charged but gave a deposition that reportedly consumed an entire day. Charlotte heard this from James Kofi and said only, "Good," and moved on. Diane Hargrove sold the Buckhead house and moved to Savannah. She and Charlotte corresponded occasionally, carefully, without pretense, navigating a relationship that had no existing language for what it was. It was not easy, but it was honest, and both of them seemed to prefer honesty to ease. Charlotte and Nadia had dinner every Sunday. This was not a rule they had agreed on. It was simply what happened. Every Sunday Nadia cooked, always something Ghanaian, always enough for 8 people even when it was just the 2 of them, and Charlotte came and sat at the table and they talked about everything. About work and family and politics and memories and the future. The way mothers and daughters do when they have found each other after a long time and have decided not to waste another moment. The photograph lived on the wall of Nadia's living room now. Framed. No longer hidden. No longer a private grief carried in a jacket pocket. A mother and her daughter. 1 hour old. Together before the world tried to separate them. Together again now. And nobody in this world or the next was going to change that. This story was never really about money. It was about what happens when people confuse having less with being less. And what happens when the people they underestimate decide to prove them wrong. There's a thing that powerful people sometimes believe. They believe that their power is proof of their worth. They believe that their wealth entitles them to make decisions about other people's lives. They believe that poverty is a kind of verdict, a judgment passed on a person by the universe, and that to remove a child from a poor woman's arms is an act of charity rather than an act of violence. They are wrong. Nadia Osei was never less of a mother because she was poor. She was a mother from the first moment she felt her daughter move inside her. She was a mother when she whispered, "I will find you," to a baby being carried out of her arms. She was a mother through every shift she worked, every certificate she earned. Every year she carried a photograph in the inside pocket of her coat. Poverty is not character. Poverty is circumstance. And circumstance can change. What cannot change? What was never changed, not by money or power or lawyers or fraudulent paperwork, was the truth. The truth that this child had a mother. The truth that this mother never stopped looking. The truth that when you take something from someone unjustly, the debt does not disappear when they run out of energy to fight. It accumulates. With interest. And one day it comes due. They took her child because she was poor. Years later, the billionaire truth destroyed them. Not because Charlotte Hargrove was angry, though she had every right to be. Not because Nadia Osei was vengeful, though she had earned that right 26 times over. But because the truth is its own kind of power. And the truth, when it is carried carefully and patiently and with purpose, always finds its way home. The elders say, no matter how long the night, the morning always comes. Nadia Osei waited 26 years for her morning. When it came, it lit up everything. Dear viewers, I want to ask you something today, and I genuinely want to read your answers in the comments below. If you were Charlotte, if you had grown up loved, provided for, given every opportunity in the world, and then discovered that your entire life had been built on someone else's stolen pain, what would you have done? Would you have walked away from the comfort? Would you have told the truth? Or would the love you felt for the people who raised you have made you stay silent? And if you were Nadia, if you had carried that photograph for 26 years, and then one evening your phone rang, and it was her, what is the very first thing you would have said? Leave your answer below. I read every single comment. Every single one. If this story moved you, if it said something you felt but could not find words for, please share it. Share it with someone who has ever been told they are not enough. Share it with someone who has ever been underestimated because of what is in their pocket instead of what is in their heart. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on your notification bell, because there are more stories coming. Stories about people who were counted out and refused to stay down. Stories about truth that was buried and came back anyway. Stories that remind you that the most dangerous person in any room is not the one with the most money. It is the one with nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate every single one of you. I will see you in the next story.